Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
Hey, if y'all ready to kick this thing off, give me a hell yeah. If y'all ready for WrestleMania 32, give me one more hell yeah. It's good to be here in Dallas, Texas tonight. Long time ago down at the Sportatorium, I kicked off my illustrious wrestling career, a.k.a. sports entertainment. Here in Dallas, Texas, all these years later, it's good to be back home. Right now, without any further ado, I'd like to bring out my friend, my former tag team partner, my arch nemesis at times, one hell of a guy, WWE Hall of Famer, the legendary, hardcore champion, Mr. Mick effing Foley. Oh, hell yeah. The question is, can you say holy shit on the Stone Cold podcast? Work with me, people. Yes.
I want to feel like we deserve it first, right? It's a pretty easy audience here. As long as we're getting reactions for no apparent reason, can I just say, Steve, that first time we've done this live, and it's a pleasure to be your guest here, right here, on the Stone Cold podcast.
But you've got to say something about this town. And you got to kick this thing off with the cheap pop, if you will. And by the same token, let me just go ahead and get this out of the way, Mick. Welcome to the Stone Cold podcast. I am not a professional broadcaster. I am an ex-professional wrestler who has a podcast. This is the Stone Cold podcast. So sometimes I miss cues. I screw things up. So we're on the WWE Network, coming to you live and in living color from Dallas, Texas. I'm here with Mick Foley. This week is kicking in hardcore. It's WrestleMania 32. I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys for tuning in all over the world. Thank you guys for showing up here locally, here in the great city of Dallas, Texas. People from all over the world, speaking many different languages, coming down here to see the event, the spectacle that is WrestleMania. With that being said, Mick, could you please lead these people in with a cheap pop?
You're right, I did not include the gratuitous name of the town, a city that means a lot to both of us. City here, right here in Dallas, Texas.
That was almost anticlimactic. Come on, work with me, people. We're right here in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
That's as good as it's going to get.
Steve, it was here, right here in Dallas, Texas, on the corner of
that's bullshit.
Hold on the corner of Cactus and Industrial. I'm going to talk about the first time I saw you. A few people out there may know the story, others might not. But I needed a little time off. I was in world-class championship wrestling. I hadn't been home in about 7 months, and I couldn't just take off. So we needed a reason for me to go home for 4 days. So Eric Embry hit me with a cowboy boot. I went off backwards, flat on my back. Spitting up blood, was carried off, and I just didn't feel like in that age and time, like fans could watch me leave. I just didn't feel comfortable because fans at that time would stay and they'd picnic and they'd be out there for several hours. So I went up into a part of the Sportatorium there that called the Crow's Nest. And after a couple of hours...
It was a kayfabe area with a fence around it.
Where families and friends would sit. And gentleman Chris Adams had his first ever wrestling class. And I thought, this should be fun to watch how bad everybody is. And there was some bad wrestling out there. But there was this one guy, long blonde hair, heck of a build. And it was like, right away I sat up, I was like, well, don't give away the ending. Yeah, it was stunning Steve Austin. But I was like... You know, we talk about that it factor, and, man, it was like I just sat up, and it was like, this kid's going to be something. He's going to be something. And I left the territory within a few months, but I kept my eyes out and my ears open, and sure enough, you know, you kind of fulfilled that prophecy, and you did okay for yourself.
Thank you, kid. I appreciate that. Hey, could someone in the back turn my earpiece down? I can't hear nothing, but everything's so loud in my ear. I hear voices, and they're too loud. You're blowing me out. Hey, let's talk about you for a second. I appreciate the plug, and I remember those days back in the day, and you dropping the elbows off the apron. I want to get to all that, but as I saw you coming down that ramp, you're looking good. Did you lose some weight? What are you doing? Because, you know, we used to travel together. We used to go to the gym. We used to do all kinds of stuff.
You can prove it. I was there, right?
I mean, hey, now, he wasn't lifting the heaviest weights, but he was there. But, no, you stopped by my crib about a year ago, and you was tired. You was pretty broke down. You was very, very tired. But you look like $1,000,000 now. What are you doing?
Man, I didn't want to say anything until I really achieved something. But I'm officially I'm down 50 pounds. And I'm not going to give away my secret, but I will just say one word. Bang! No, I've been eating better. When I saw you, I mean, I was, you know, working really hard mentally. I was doing my own shows. I'd always been doing some writing. But, you know, the stuff I'd done had some consequences. And, man, I'd been, you know, basically told that there was no hope for me as far as my spine went, you know. And you were asking me, is there anybody can help you, anybody that can work with you? And I was like, Steve, you know, honestly, I'm not going to bring this show to a screeching halt because there's kind of a happy, a joyful conclusion. I don't want to give away. I don't want to go into a dirty area there. But I just started working about 5 months ago, and I started making some progress and realizing that I wasn't going to be the guy to go back in the gym and impress anybody. And so, you know, I've been doing a lot of swimming, incorporating the DDP yoga into the swimming. And so even if you see a guy like me, you know, he's not a big weight man. I think I used to bench from 425, 4:45 in the evening, something like that. That still works?
He's only been doing that for 20 years.
But the guys in the gym see me come in, and they think they're expecting me to be out on the bench, and after about 20 minutes, like, well, where is he? And they look out in the pool, and I'm in the pool going, bang! You know? But it's been working for me. I got a long way left to go, but it's nice that people are noticing that. And it's the lightest I've been since I wrestled Randy Orton at Backlash in 2004. So,
hey, you've been on my podcast many times. We've rode down many roads together, stayed at many cheap hotels. Before I go to my point, let's talk about those cheap hotels. You're one of the cheapest guys in the history of the business. And I was too.
yeah.
So, how are you now? Saving all the money? Did it pay off now, being so frugal? Because were you frugal before you got into the business, or did the wily veteran Skandar Akbar or Bronco Lubitsch say, hey, save your money, kid?
I had those guys. I mean, you know, if I had fallen in with a different crowd and said, you know, you need to impress people, you need the Cadillac, things may have turned out differently. I had Akbar and I had Lubitsch. I mean, I remember even when I came back to the Sportatorium when I was with WCW, like, Ak brought me into that back room and he lectured me. You know, like, not that I was making any expenditures, but he lectured me about saving my money and not to go out there and buy that car, you know. And I made my share of mistakes like everybody has, but it was always went back to it's not what you make, it's what you save. And hopefully when the younger guys, and talking to a lot of the NXT guys, you know, backstage, they might take a look at me and go like, he did pretty well, and he's wearing Skechers slippers, you know, like, and sweatpants at 50. So, I like that lifestyle. And you and I would duel it out to see who could stretch $1 the farthest. I think Owen and I actually had a contest with a $20 bill to see how many days or weeks we could last on $20. And, Owen finally tapped out at about the 2-week mark.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hey, all. Taking a moment to share a new podcast, True Underdog, recently launched by 4 times Entrepreneur of the Year award winner Jason Waller. It's real, it's raw, it's motivational. If you're looking for inspiring stories and killer entrepreneurship advice, you got to head over and subscribe to True Underdog Podcast. Jason Waller is the definition of a true underdog. He was raised in a trailer park, suffered childhood abuse, was kicked out of high school, and became a dad in his teens. After struggling to care for his young family and hearing the words no and you can't too many times, Jason found the power within and used his street smarts to start 3 companies from the ground up. With his latest venture, Power Home Solar, on the path to becoming a billion-dollar enterprise. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling motivated already. And trust me when I tell you, this guy's energy is contagious. Head over to True Underdog Podcast to hear how Jason and his high-profile guests turn their lives around to achieve massive success. Subscribe to True Underdog Podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app.
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
As many times I've traveled with you, there's a lot of things that I never did ask you. And growing up, back where you grew up, you created this character of Dude Love. I mean, you were backyard wrestling. You were jumping off the roof of your house, doing all this stuff. And then ultimately, you get into business. You do a couple of favors. You pay some dues, and you turn into this guy named Cactus Jack. Now, how do you go from a guy who's all about love and lava lamps to Cactus Jack, who's one of the most vicious, insane, although you're extremely intelligent, characters to ever hit the ring? How did that happen? Why?
Dude Love was absolutely what I wanted to be. You know, it was that
Chick
was
magnet.
Chick magnet. I wanted wrestling as escape from all the things that I wasn't in real life. And it might sound odd and outside the borders of mental sanity now, but I'd actually go out with the wig and like the glasses and the orange headband, and felt like I was more comfortable being that guy than I was as myself. And I thought, once I start wrestling, I need to establish myself. I need to learn some things. I can't just jump in there as Dude Love. So in the interim period, I decided to become Cactus Jack as a tribute to my dad, who was the original Jack Foley. And it just along the way, it was clear that Mother Nature was not going to cooperate with this Dude Love character. And I kind of embraced the Cactus Jack thing and kind of celebrated what Terry Taylor had taught me, which was if you can't look better than the average person out there, then you got to work as hard as you can to look different, And so everything I did was predicated on looking different and acting different, sizing up situations, reacting differently than the average person would. And that's what Cactus Jack was based on.
Okay, Jack then came from your dad, but where did the cactus part of it and where the maniacal ways of Cactus Jack, the vicious streak?
Yeah. Well, like I said, at that time, in the mid-'80s, nobody was looking for a guy with my build. I remember Dominic DiNucci personally calling AWA, which was a territory that prided itself on its wrestling, and talking to one of the main people there and saying, I got a boy, he's a good boy. And I knew the question because he answered, well, he's a tall. And he waited another few seconds and he repeated again, well, he's a tall. Because they were wondering what's the body look like. And I'm convinced I was one of the first people to actually invest a little bit of money at the time, $120 into some decent studio photos, And I had the baby oil and I had the barbells and I was doing 3-4 sets of curls. I managed to squeeze off a couple of decent photos and sent them out to Jerry Jarrett and whoever was running full time in 1987, 88. To the point where when I showed up at the studio in Memphis TV, I was told that Randy Hales and and people like that were gathering together, looking at the photos, looking at me, and wondering if we were actually the same guy. Because I showed up in the studio with just the slightest suggestion of muscle on the deltoid, and that's trick photography. It wasn't. I was just said the foresight to put a little bit into that. But I was booked basically on the way they thought I looked in Memphis. And then I ended up keeping the job because I was willing to go to some pretty extreme lengths to make the matches entertaining. And I realized that if I was going to have to connect, and I was just telling one of the younger women backstage about how one of the things, biggest threats I faced was trying to be aggressive when I was not a naturally aggressive person, like trying to get that real heat. And the lesson that Terry Funk imparted on me after I wrestled Norman the Lunatic and Muckam Singh, where he came up to me and taught me about the parable of the angel and the devil, where, the angel said, without you, there is no me. And he goes, Cactus, Norman was that angel out there, but were you the devil? Were you the devil? It doesn't matter what you do. The moves didn't matter if that real anger and the getting the heat wasn't there. And at that point, it wasn't. So I had to work really hard to be that guy who could get the type of heat that would merit the type of response, when the big bumps started happening.
Hey, you were talking about back in Dallas in the Crow's Nest watching me when I was in Chris Adams Wrestling School. But tell me another story, because you were Cactus Jack. You were in Dallas, Texas, and you met a girl.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story? I know you're happily married.
With my son in the front row? I'm not sure if I can tell that story. Earmuffs, buddy.
What happened?
Well, one of the problems I ran into when I was in Tennessee, Robert Fuller was one of my mentors and said, son, Jacko, you're going to have a heck of a time with that accent, because I still had a couple of telltale gives, the Long Island accent. It wasn't strong, but like ball and maul, things like that. So I would go out at night and I'd work on my accent, and I'd be in character all the time. Like, there was no question when you went out in public, you were going to be that character. So I went out to the Roadhouse was about a mile away from the Sportatorium, and I met a young lady, and she liked me, and it was, kind of an instant thing, and we started dating, and I thought, all right, I'm at a crossroads. Do I tell her I am not who I appeared to be? That I don't have the same name, that I don't actually act that same way? And I thought to myself, she wasn't attracted to Mick Foley. She was attracted to Cactus Jack. And so the answer I came up to myself was, oh, hell no, I don't tell her who I actually am. And she never really knew. Like, I would have to force myself. As we were driving, get to the airport, I'm like, oh, there's the University of Dallas. And I remember that's where I would go. I had a couple of friends. I would stop off, and I would get into character at the University of Dallas. I would drive over to Duncanville, and I would essentially put on an extended performance, for the entirety of my time there. And it was great character building. Wasn't great necessarily for building a quality relationship.
So what happened to this relationship? Did it meet its demise because she found out you were actually Mick Foley?
She never found out.
She knows now because she's watching the WWE Network.
Never really.
How did you break up this engagement, or did she break up with you?
No, you know what? She did briefly break up with me, and then there was a phone call where she had seen on television that I was going to be wrestling Eric Embry in a scaffold match at the Fort Worth Sam Houston Coliseum, and begged me not to do it. I said, well, am I supposed to tell the powers that be that I can't do it because my ex-girlfriend asked me not to? And she said, yes, just tell them anything. And I was up on top of that scaffold, and like my grip gave way. Like, even without the considerable weight gain, I was never really a great pull-up guy. My grip gave way, and I hit that canvas, and man, I was in a rough way, and I'd fractured my wrist. And I saw her there crying at ringside, and she's like, will you take me back? And I was like, yeah, okay. And that night, I remember specifically, denying the request of her children, to have soft drinks with their meal. I was like, kids, I think you better have the water. It's free. So even in or out of character, I was always looking to save a couple dollars.
Talking about that scaffold match with Eric Embry, everybody has a style that they develop, as a wrestler. I was really influenced by Nature Boy Ric Flair. I just thought he was the greatest of all time. I know you're a big Terry Funk guy.
Yeah.
But how did you go about developing your hardcore style, which would basically last the rest of your career? How did you come upon that? Because I remember in Dallas, man, I was in the wrestling school. I was just now coming in, and watching you come into the Sportatorium and run down that apron and dropping that elbow on the guy, that was the hardest wooden floor in the history of the business, and it might as well have been harder than concrete. But tell me about developing your style, because I'm sure when you were in school or learning to wrestle, you're doing the things in your backyard, but when Dominic DiNucci formerly trained you, he didn't train you to do that. So what drove you to come up with the style you created?
You learn the letters, and then you create your words, and you create your sentences, and then your paragraphs. And they said, if you want to do that other stuff, you can do that on your own. And so I did start adding those things. I basically took what I wanted to see as a fan and tried to make it come to life in the ring. And two of my biggest influences before I ran into Terry Funk, before I became familiar with his stuff, was Bruiser Brody and the Dynamite Kid. And I knew I could never be as wild as Brody, and I sure as hell knew I wasn't the athlete the Dynamite Kid was. But I thought, what if I could combine like the brawling style with kind of that like using my own body as a weapon? If I could combine those two elements, and come up with my own patterns, that I might have something original to offer this business. And so what you saw in Texas would be kind of like me finding my own way, so that instead of being yelled at and lectured as I was in Tennessee, that when I got to Texas, I did have Eric Embry saying, whatever you want to do. I had these guys like Akbar going, baby, that's beautiful, you do whatever you want. Jack, that's just try things. Go out there, it doesn't matter if you fail, as long as you try. And I would, have to talk these veterans into maybe taking a look at it. I was about 265 at that time, coming out about 15 feet on that elbow, and no one had done those type of things before. Poor Al Grosnick, who ran the Sportatorium, was afraid that I was going to go through the floor, because it was coming down with a lot of force at that time. But I felt like I needed to do those things. Structurally, maybe dropping an elbow off the ring apron from that type of height and distance wasn't a very sound idea, but I was building a reputation. Word was getting around. Guys like Jim Ross and Jim Cornette were seeing the show, and I was kind of like building up a name, and that proved to be really helpful for me. A year or so down the road.
You were working, and man, all the times that I worked in the ring with you, all of your stuff looked very vicious, but you were always a fun guy to work with because, one, you always wanted to have the best match on the card. It didn't matter what night of the week it was, what town we were in, whatever, you were going to give 100%, but you were always very safe. Early in your career, when you were kind of learning the chops, coming out of DiNucci School before you turned into Cactus Jack, you worked with Dynamite Kid.
Yeah.
He hit you with a clothesline. I think it damn near knocked you out.
Yeah, it would be 3 weeks before I would chew solid food again. I didn't know at the time as you wouldn't get those things checked out, but basically dislocated my jaw. And at that time, for about a year, maybe more, that was kind of like the Achilles heel. Every time I got hit on the point of the jaw, that jaw would come out of alignment, and I had a lot of trouble chewing. Thought maybe I'd have to, give it up because I couldn't chew food very regularly.
But you're one of the toughest guys I know, and ultimately, after, was it before or after you left WCW, you go to Japan, and, dude, you're in some of the craziest matches of all time. Barbed wire matches with C4 explosives, working with Terry Funk, working with some of the Japanese guys, and I believe, and in my research, it was one night of events. I think you worked 3 times. You damn near got killed using C4 and explosive. I believe you made $300. And you said that was one of the most, your defining moments, one of your proudest moments in the business. Why?
Yeah. Well, it was...
Do you like pain? No, because back in the day, you would ask. I mean, I thought you did. Now, as we were talking backstage, I know you don't like pain.
Yeah. It was something I worked through, something I accepted from the very beginning. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to learn to live with a lot of pain. And then my definition of what a lot of pain was, we kept getting more extensive to the point where, as I got older, it's like maybe some of these things were not a good idea. I never liked it. I'd say it motivated me. Like, I was a guy that, especially as I got older, I needed to be jolted into like almost an alternate reality, like to become that character. For a while, the character, me and the character were, there was a time when there wasn't much difference between Cactus Jack and myself, right? And that was when things were really going smooth. And I'd say that was when, in the Attitude Era, you had guys who were really close to the bone. Whether it was you as Stone Cold, me as Mankind, Triple H, The Rock, everybody's just basically themselves dialing it up, to 11, But as I got older and I wasn't really that guy, I would need those shots, definitely. I'm talking about like, whether it's a frying pan from Edge or, cookie sheet with Edge, to kind of remind me that I was Cactus Jack. So I definitely responded to it. I wouldn't say I liked it, but I'm not sure I could have done what I did without it.
But you weren't seeking pain, but that was your desire and your MO, using your body as a weapon and then taking the blows as well. That was your style of satisfying the crowd, giving them every damn dollar's worth.
Can I jump off for a second and talk a little bit about Dean Ambrose?
Yeah, I want to talk about Dean Ambrose, but I just got one more thing. Before we jump into Dean Ambrose, I can understand you wrestling the style that you wrestled, and I enjoyed wrestling you. But when you were doing the matches in Japan, were you married to your current wife?
Yeah.
So how do you call up your wife and say, hey, I damn near got killed, almost got blown up by a C4, and on top of it, I made $300. Okay, you can deal with it. How does your wife deal with it?
I think, in the interest of fairness, I think it was $400 a day.
Hey, when you count a buck like Mick Foley does,
you
it might
add that up. It was about $3,000.
Now, how does your wife cope with that?
Well, we got to remember, my wife had already been on the receiving end of the phone call from Germany where I said, I've got some good news and some bad news. All right, what's the good news? I said, hey, I'm coming home early. She said, what's the bad news? I said, one of my ears is not going to be coming with me. So she was used to some of those phone calls already, and the one that, this was very close to the time I got the phone call from WWE. Like, my dad picked me up at the airport after that infamous tournament. It was then known as a Kawasaki Dream Tournament. It's become known in wrestling lore as the King of the Death Match. And, I mean, I was in rough shape. Terry left. Terry came over, and people can read into this what they want. I like to make it so you guys can read between the lines. Terry just came up to me before that last match, and he said, I wouldn't do this for many people. And then we went out there and did what we thought we had to do to kind of live up to the standards that people had set. And I was in a rough way, but didn't realize it because I still had that kind of post-match glow. And Terry left, in an ambulance to a hero's farewell. And then I did all the interviews, for a couple hours. And then I started realizing, man, I'm in need of some medical attention. Like hands need stitching. The good ear had nearly been lost. Stitches above the eyebrow and in the head. And in all that, I had completely lost that. That a good deal of my skin had been burned. Off my arm from that explosive. Like, didn't even ask about that. And then it was not until the next day on the flight that arm started turning colors. Started drying out, started peeling, and when I got home, I walked in. We had a little apartment in Long Island, and my wife, first thing she did was she went, "Oh my God! Like, was it a smoking flight?" And I said, "No." And I had my dad with me. I didn't want my dad to worry about me too much. And all she kept saying was, "The smell is just awful. Like, what was it?" Like, and then the moment my dad left, she goes, "Mick, seriously, what smells?" And I rolled up my sleeve and I went, "It's me. It's me."
Flesh was burned.
And a couple days after that, WWE had their SummerSlam, and I'm working an independent show, and I run into Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and X-Pac, and I was working a match with Sabu, and just all that skin just kind of came off,
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com. I understand that you've got a project coming up with the WWE Network involving your family.
Yeah.
What is this project?
Well, I could tell you, but I think it would be more beneficial if I introduced my co-star at this point. Please say hello to my daughter, if you've known since infancy. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Noelle Foley.
Oh, hell yeah.
Come on in here, honey. Here you go. Thanks, Noah. See you here. You want to sit here next to me? Okay.
Noelle Foley, ladies and gentlemen. Noelle, welcome to the Shizzo. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Here's the thing. I've known Mick for years, and I knew Noelle when she was a baby, and she didn't know me because she was a baby.
Yes, I did.
But now, all these years later, and here we are, a tall drink of water, 6 feet, beautiful. I would never guess that Mick is your dad. I mean, Mick and me are close friends. Welcome to the show. Tell me your thoughts and tell me the process and what's going on with the name of the show is Holy Foley. Am I correct?
Holy Foley. It's a great name.
We talked about Dude Love a little bit earlier. Mr. McMahon, you and I used to ride up the roads, and it had always been said that you couldn't really become a superstar in the company until Mr. McMahon was sold on you as a character, and then he became sold on Stone Cold. Even though I was doing some main events with The Undertaker, I'd done Mind Games with Shawn Michaels, still not completely on board until he found out about the Dude Love character. Had found out that I'd wanted to be this guy and that I actually had footage of me being this guy. And Vince saw the footage and saw something into that and had a vision. In the same way, Vince saw some footage of my interactions with my daughter. So when it was announced in the press release of his very unique relationship with his daughter, it's nothing creepy. It's just she's 22 and we've had 3 arguments.
3 little fights.
3 little fights. There's some great chemistry. We play off each other. And Mr. McMahon saw this and he thought it was. I got the word that he thought it was a shame that I'm going to do my Vince here for you, And the word I got was, it's just a shame that Mick doesn't like me. And wouldn't want to work with me because he'd think I'd ruin everything. And I turned to Kevin Dunn and I said, I think I like Vince more than he thinks I like him. And I was told, then you need to tell him that. And that was what changed my relationship with Mr. McMahon. And he said, so you'd like to work with us? Yeah, man, I would welcome that opportunity. And so Noelle is here. We're going to try to capture some of that magic in kind of a reality / drama comedy on the network.
Okay, that being said, then, Noelle, what is basically the gist of the show? What will it capture? Because I've known you for forever. You're beautiful. You've been doing some modeling, but now also other sights set on maybe something in the business.
Yeah, we're not your average family. We do things a little differently, so it's going to be like him doing his thing and me doing my thing, me training to become a diva.
You are going to train to be a WWE diva. You're going to get in this squared circle, 20 by 20 ring, and wrestle.
Yes.
And make your thoughts are what? Because
I thought that the way I walked would be the greatest advertisement against following in my footsteps, right? But she loves it. She's been drawn to it since she was a little child. It was never something she phased out of. All my kids. I say that my home is accompanied by the sounds of human agony because my son Hugh has been having matches with his action figures. I just wake up to the words, let's take another look at that, JR. It's just the house we live in. It's just a wrestling home. And if she's dead set on becoming a wrestler, then I'm going to have a hand in her training, make sure that she gets trained the right way and that she has a shot at doing what it is that makes her happy.
Noah, you grew up with your dad being who he is and being around the business your entire life. So what are your aspirations? What are your goals as you go into the squared circle to be a diva? And will you try to mimic his style?
Am I going to follow his style?
Yeah, I mean, they're big shoes to fill, following in his footsteps.
I maybe won't follow his style because I don't want to walk like that. But I can... He can teach me some good stuff.
But what was it like being a kid? Because I'm a father of 2, and I was never home. Your relationship with your dad, you guys are so close. You've only had 3 arguments. What was it like growing up with him always on the road? And are you ready to get on the road and live that life? Because, as you know, it is a tough life.
Yeah. He did a really great job. As much as he traveled, he would, even if he had a day free, he would come back and see us. He would take us on the road. So he did the best that he could, and I think we turned out pretty good.
So, but it was okay when he was missing all the major functions because, he was on the road trying to make a living, pay the bills.
What was that?
So you were okay with him missing out on a lot of your milestone events as a kid growing up?
Yeah, because he made up for it, and you did your best.
I was always home on the 6 a.m. flight. I did the best I could, and they appreciated that. They appreciated they got to do things. I mean, even going on the Wrestle Vessel cruise, and we look back and here's these autographs like from the Big Show from 1999. Eddie Guerrero signing to Dewey and Noel, like. They were around it so much, like it was just part of their lives. And there's always a trade-off, like you wish you'd been home, and I have been home a lot more with the younger kids. But she sees, that's a good picture there, the Foley family there.
Yeah.
Pretty good photo there. And then she's done a lot of thinking about it, and it's really wrestling's kind of the love of her life, and she wants to give it her best shot.
So when will you guys start filming this project?
In about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's coming up really quick.
You've been around cameras all your life. Now invading, so to speak, your home. Are you down with that? You cool with that? Are you ready? Because, when the cameras start rolling,
we're ready to show people the real us.
Would you consider the Foley family to be quote-unquote normal, whatever normal is?
We're like a weird normal.
It's kind of like...
Define weird normal before I move on. What is weird normal?
Weird normal is like we're your normal, average family, but at the same time, having him, he's just a weird dad. We make weird noises.
Do you remember the Munsters?
Noel, are you all as frugal as your father?
I really am.
So you're not a shopaholic?
I'm not, no. Maybe a shopaholic, but I get the best deals.
All right, I dig that. All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. Noel, thanks for coming out. I'm looking forward to seeing the show. Good luck with the filming, and good luck with your in-ring career. It's going to be a tough one, as you know it. I look forward to seeing what you can do.
Thank you. And don't forget, Holy Foley is coming right here to the WWE Network this August. Yeah!
And you heard it first right here in Dallas, Texas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. All right, here we go. I was sitting there listening to the music, waiting on a cue. Hey, let's talk a little bit about going back into the Squared Circle, the Mankind character. How was that born? Who came up with that idea? Because didn't Vince initially want to call you Mason the Mutilator?
Yeah. When I showed up for my meeting there in Stamford, there was an illustration. I didn't know what in the world it was there for.
Talk to us about the meeting in Stamford, because if you're in the leagues coming up, if you're trying to be, get to the big leagues, and that's the WWE, make no mistake about it. It was back then, it still is. Well, it's the only game in town now. But every now and then you get that invite to the house.
I never got the invite to the house.
Okay, or you got the invite, but you're going to see the man.
I was going to see the man, but I didn't.
And you're pitching him, or he's pitching you?
Did you go to the house?
I went to the house.
Son of a gun! I'll tell you what, there were a lot of guys who got the invite to the house who do not currently reside in the WWE Hall of Fame. So when I was there, when you were there, there was a list of 4 or 5 guys that were supposed to be the future of WWE, and you and I were not on that list.
No.
So Mr. McMahon had the ability to adapt, and at the time, and I told this story on the Cheap Pop special I did. Luckily, I didn't hear it until just about 2 years ago from Bruce Pritchard. But it seemed odd to me at the time that Mr. McMahon would want to take, a mask that had been made for The Undertaker when he had fractured his orbital bone. It was an idea, it was on the table for The Undertaker. They eventually went with kind of a Phantom of the Opera type white mask look, which is actually pretty eerie. The Undertaker can make just about anything work for him. And had this look, and he had a reason for wanting to put me under the mask that he gave me. But it turns out that at a booking meeting in 1995, in the fall of 1995, that after JR had come aboard, Director of Talent Relations, and he began this steady push for me, slow, steady campaign, that finally Mr. McMahon slammed his hand on a table and said, "All right, damn it, I'll bring him in, but I'm covering up his face." That's the secret behind the Mankind mask.
Really?
Yeah.
But here's the thing: when Mick gets all trimmed up, you're actually a good-looking dude. And I'm going on record as saying that. So why?
It's been well disguised for many years, and I bought into the idea that I was the most hideous wrestler. I mean, I had photos that Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, world's ugliest wrestler, And it took me a long time. It was actually on the Today Show in 2001 where I was like, I kept replaying the footage of me and Katie Couric, and I'm like, I'm not a bad-looking guy, but I had really played into it because that was kind of my strength, the facial expressions, the tongue through the teeth, doing whatever I could with whatever I had to make, whatever impression I needed to.
I was talking to Vince, and I don't know if you know this, but Vince was against you coming into the WWE.
Yeah.
And it was, in fact, Jim lobbying for you, and Vince actually didn't like your work style.
Yeah.
How hard was it to overcome that barrier, because you would go on to become, three-time world champion? One of the top guys.
Three-time WWE champion.
One of the greatest runs in the history of the business. But, what I'm saying is you came in, the man saw nothing in you, and you made something of nothing.
He saw nothing in me before I came in. I think you cannot ever overstate the importance of The Undertaker in your corner, figuratively speaking, because 20 years ago tomorrow, April 1st, 1996, I debuted on Raw, and later on in that program, I came out and attacked The Undertaker, and my entire life changed. The fact that you had a guy, even at that point, 20 years ago, was one of the most respected guys in the locker room, in the business, who wanted to do business, who maybe was tired of just being matched up with guys who were taller or heavier than him, and wanted to do something maybe with some, some mental dueling, and thought that he could do that with me. And we were able to go out there, and Vince took a chance. He went against his better judgment, went with what Jim Ross thought, with what The Undertaker thought. He went around to a lot of the guys like Kevin Nash and said, what do you think about this guy? And he came away with a little bit different perspective, enough rope to hang myself, so to speak. And fortunately for me, the character just kind of took off, and you and I would drive down those roads, and we had this bond, kind of formed out of some of the frustration we felt, that like the push other guys were given, or contracts we heard that other guys had, and we kind of pushed each other to be better. And I think that was one of those secrets. We were kind of the underdogs there against WCW. Everybody wanted to make each other better. We all wanted to steal the show when the time was right. It was a really healthy atmosphere. There was definitely the competition there, but also kind of like a brotherhood as well.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Have you ever heard that story that Napoleon used the Egyptian Sphinx for target practice and shot its nose off? Or maybe you've heard that a French astrologer named Nostradamus correctly predicted nearly 500 years of human history. Or maybe someone told you that the legendary blues guitarist Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in Mississippi. These stories are what I like to call historical myths. Great little tales that may or may not have any basis in historical fact. On Our Fake History, we explore these historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story it simply must be told. If you dig stories about death-obsessed emperors, lost civilizations, desperate sieges, voodoo black magic, and famous historical figures you thought you knew, then Our Fake History might just be your new favorite podcast. Still not sure? Then stick around to the end of the episode today to hear a teaser episode of Our Fake History. If you dig it, then subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In your career in the WWE, and I want to go back to The Undertaker here in a minute, in a Hell in a Cell match, but in your career in the WWE, you played three different characters. You were Cactus Jack, you were Mankind, you were Dude Love. Did you ever get the three of them confused? Did you ever morph one into the other? Because I thought there was a little crossover, but by and large, they were separate characters. I mean, are you a schizophrenic? Because we always talk about a lot of the good guys are themselves turned up. Are you three people turned up or one?
Well, Dude Love later, I was able to explore that kind of like nerd zone, when I became the commissioner, and like lose all pretense of being a tough guy because I felt like I had enough of that on video, as proof. And so Dude Love would later kind of come in, and usher in like the Commissioner Foley era where anything goes, nothing's too stupid, nothing's too foolish. The stuff we did with Edge was just kind of like magic being created out of thin air. And then Mankind, it was like the darker, like even my son Mickey, who's 15, Mickey would go, Dad, like the Mankind, like, no, I'm not talking about the tortured soul Mankind, like 1997 right. Mankind. He'd talk about the lighter-hearted Mankind. But I would have to, to get into those matches, I would have to find a way to become that kind of dark person. And I would spend hours in that boiler room. I spent 4 of, my first 7 nights underneath the ring, under that ring, coming out, and I thought nothing of it. I thought that's a perfectly acceptable place to get into character and be, rocking. Even as I talk about it, I kind of rock as the old Mankind would.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking about acting backstage, of which you and I really don't care for, but you were Daniel Day-Lewis back in the day because you were doing all the things that he does to get into a role. You realize that now, right?
Yeah, I do.
Because I never had to just work into getting the character. Boom, glass hits, I'm me, jazzed up. But
Mankind was definitely a stretch. It was a stretch, and I had to work really hard for it. Latter day Mankind.
But that's one reason I think it was so successful, because it was damn near a shoot. Because I believed everything that you were doing, I believed everything you were saying, and that was a conviction to the character.
So there was a defining moment for me when I did a multi-part interview, extensive interview with Jim Ross in the spring of 1997, and I mentioned that I was told you could never really become a true star in WWE until Mr. McMahon became sold on you. And it was when I was doing that interview with Jim Ross, completely in character. I was locked in. Everything I said was honesty, from honesty as Mick Foley, but in the character of Mankind. And there was I was just locked into a role as probably a Hollywood actor would be. And they went to change a tape at a certain time, and I just heard a voice in the darkness, and it said, "This is outstanding." And it was Mr. McMahon, and to me, that was the deciding factor. Everything after that was, was pretty easy. I think it was that night that kind of brought him over to my side.
Hey, man, let's go back to the Undertaker, and because that promo helped define you and get you over with Vince, the old man, as we say affectionately. Also, a big part of that, and your success really parlayed in, fast-forwarded, in the Hell in a Cell match. I guess it was 98. It was a King of the Ring, and it was you versus the Undertaker, and it was a match no one would have ever envisioned. I had to follow that match, me and the wonderful Kane, in a First Blood match, and we did the best we could. But you can't, sometimes, some nights, you can't follow what 2 guys or 4 guys or whatever the deal is does. The brutality of that match was off the charts, and that plays in going back to the in-ring style that you created, and now all of a sudden, there you guys are. But before, let me go back. Before then, you were thinking about this match and what could you do in a Hell in a Cell. You'd been in many cages. You're there talking with your dear friend Terry Funk, and take it over from here, because that's how this...
I'm watching the first ever match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. To me, it was still the best cell match ever. In my opinion, the best cell match ever. These guys are off the charts. And I looked at Terry and I said, what am I going to do? I was never a great cage match guy. It didn't play to my physical strengths. Pulling up, it just wasn't physical strength for me. And Terry kind of jokingly says, "Cactus, I think you should start the match on top of that cell." And we both started laughing. And then I said, "I think I can do that." Terry tried to talk me out of it, but I already had that image in my head, and that's when I started getting into the promo zone and just thinking about it. And part of the challenge for me was driving down the road and visualizing things and then trying to bring them to life, on the microphone or in the ring. And that was I was a real big believer in seeing the picture, thinking the picture, becoming the picture. And the
visualization.
What's that?
Visualization.
Yeah. And the most important part of that equation is number 4. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And fortunately, in my case, the mistakes I made ended up being career makers for me. The the mistakes I made happened when the cameras were on, captured, for prosperity, and turned out to be like the milestones of my career, all things that didn't work out quite like I'd hoped they would.
Sometimes when you start a match, it's the lockup is so important. If it's a snap lockup and things look intense, and it could be a sign of good things to come. Starting that match, grab the attention of the audience from the get-go, and as soon as it started, over the top you go. I sent out a question on my Twitter account, and hey, send in questions. I'm talking to Mick Foley. Everybody wants to know about that bump. You're not a scientist. You've never done this bump before. How do you prepare for something like that? What was it like in the fall? What do you remember? Let's just go anywhere with this, because it was one of the damnedest things I'd ever seen, and someone giving their body to try to entertain the masses.
I was really thankful when Jericho wrote his book, and he talked about the potential for doing something off the top, and he said, I went up there earlier in the day, and he said, and the people below looked like ants. He said, I'm not exaggerating. They looked like ants. And I was so thankful, because I was like, that's exactly what they look like. And so when I got up there, I thought, this is the worst idea I've ever had. And I was just trying to think, like, how do I very gingerly climb back down that cell after I'm on top of there? And it was just that solution was worse than anything else I could come up with. And so we carried forward, had no idea, after that kind of epic landing that things were actually going to get worse for me that night. But they did. And you brought up something when we were talking backstage that like 99% of you either didn't know or forgotten. But like, even after I left, I wasn't done for the evening. Like, I was not done. I hugged Stephanie McMahon. I smiled at Stephanie McMahon. First time I'd ever seen her. Pat Patterson had a personal real life tragedy, and I hugged Pat Patterson, looked at young Stephanie McMahon, gave her a smile. The teeth were all scattered across my face, and then I went back out there.
Well, you went back out there to interfere in my match, the first blood match with Kane. But here's the thing. You take the choke slam on the top of the cage. Someone tweeted me, why did you go back to the top of the cage? You just got thrown off. Why would you go back? But you did. The cage gave way. You landed in a heap. You could have been killed. Yeah. Finally, the match was over. It was one of the best matches in the history of the business. And then you come running down. And really, when I watched the film back, I watched it.
Would you describe that as running?
You were doing the best you could. But you had this kind of gait. You kind of had this smile on your face, whatever it was. Or replay. Look at this. There it is right there. Man, that's like a puppy dog running after a bowl of food. And look, you can see.
And look what you did to me.
But see, look, there's a little bit of.
Where's the humanity?
But there's a little discombobulation here, because we would do this before we go into. See, now I'm kicking you. I'm going offense here. I normally would just hit the stunner. I don't think you're all there. Do you remember this?
Not a moment of it.
Okay, boom, you're done.
I still have the tacks in my shoes. That's where the JR should have just replayed him, say, would somebody stop the damn match there? Let's talk about a guy you wanted to talk about. Let's talk about Dean Ambrose. Yeah. He's got a big match coming up. He's going to be... Dean Ambrose is going against Brock Lesnar in a street fight match. Dean Ambrose, your thoughts on this kid? We got a few minutes to talk about Dean?
Short time.
There's a takeaway. I like people to take this away, is that when I talked to Mr. McMahon, I said, I don't care if I'm on once a year, every 2 years, as long as when I come back it's something that has force to it. And I thought when I'd come back October of 2014 with Dean and Seth Rollins, that had force. So when I was asked about coming back to do a backstage promo, I first said, I told you I wanted to do something that had force. And they said, well, we think this could be effective. And just in the back of my mind, every wrestler, I think, has this idea that in order to be important, that promo has to be delivered in ring. And if there's a lesson to be learned, it's like I certainly learned it. I went back there. And I wanted to get along. I didn't want to create waves, when I was given a structure, and I didn't think it was great, but I didn't want to make waves. And it was only about 10 minutes before we went on air, and I just had this, this thought, which was, it's not my job not to make waves. It's my job to do the best job that I can while I'm here, and to portray a guy like Dean who deserves it in the most positive light I can. That's my job. So when the writer asked me, I said, I think the overall tone's too humorous. I don't think anything is nearly as effective. after I hand him that bat as the real deal, and it just felt like all these things were returning to me. Because if you'd asked me earlier that afternoon or even leading up to it, how do you approach a backstage promo, I wouldn't have known, because you can't be 100% dialed in, turned up to 11. I'm not a guy like The Rock who, like, through the sheer force of his personality kind of raises everybody, you know, like that tide just raises and everybody benefits. Like, I have to approach it in a different way. And I didn't know how I was going to do it until we went on that camera. And I'd thrown out a line to Dean, and I just give him this line about, I'm Mick Foley, that's what I did. Dean Ambrose, this is what I do. And I threw it away like I didn't think it would work in that setting. And then he looks at me and goes, I like that. And I said, what do you like? He goes, I like that line about you being Mick Foley and me being Dean Ambrose. I said, you do? And I'm so thankful we did that promo live, like that we didn't go back and pre-record it, because we would have been nitpicking it and saying, all right, Mick messed up a word there. And it was so rewarding because I said that line, right, and I could hear the audience respond. And then Dean gives that line. He goes, yeah, there you have it. I'm Dean Ambrose. And I feel this wave. And, Steve, I'm not kidding you. You know, people can look in close. Every time I talk about it, it starts here, the hat, and it sweeps down the arm. It's like 30 years later. Like, I still get emotional when I talk about this stuff. And we finished that promo, and I had this, like, distinct feeling, which was something really important just happened here, you know. Right. And I walked away that evening, and I thought, that was one of the most important things I've ever done, and I will never look at a backstage promo, the opportunity to do a backstage promo, the same. And I'd like to think that if there's a lesson learned, that any wrestler, any guy, or anyone who wants to aspire to be in WWE should never look at a backstage promo as a throwaway or anything less than the most important thing it can possibly be. Because that night, I thought there was no place I could have been more effective than with Dean Ambrose for 2 minutes backstage.
He's got his work cut out for him as he heads into WrestleMania 32. The task at hand is to defeat Brock Lesnar. He's going to have all the toys there to play with. Good luck to him. The Hall of Fame coming right up. I know you had a Stan Hansen story and a Freebird story. I'm so happy to see the fabulous Freebirds go in, because you were in Dallas when they were hot.
Yeah.
I was here in Dallas when they were hot. We got about 3 minutes left. You got a Stan Hansen or a Freebird story? Because
I do.
I'm so proud of these guys. And the whole class.
I saw Buddy Roberts' wife, Janice. She was great. When she was in Texas, she did the merchandise. I have a photo somewhere. Brandon, I believe, is Buddy Roberts Jr. is going to be inducting his dad. I got a photo of him, Buddy, helping me move, and Brandon at age 2 or 3, you know, eating an ice pop with me in 1989. I love those guys. Michael Hayes, one of the most influential guys, you know, on the mic or in the ring, you know, couldn't speak more highly of Michael. And when it comes to Stan, man, like, I tell you how highly I thought of Stan. Like, my son Dewey, like, became really close to being called Hansen or Stan, because Stan had that much of an effect on me when I met him in Japan. He talked so highly of his family and what his children meant to him that I called my wife at home and I said, would you like to make a baby? And so Stan had an influence on me. You know, I still don't think it's wise to give a guy who is legally blind a clothesline as a finishing move. Like, a lot of people paid a price for that. You know, I'm not advocating that at all. But he was a guy who hit hard. And I'll just one thing is, like, you know, everyone out there has an idea of how a wrestling match is compiled. And to me, it doesn't matter how it takes place, just as long as you get to the finish line. And, you know, how you get there is up to you. I went up to Stan on the first day of the tour, and I said, Stan, I got an idea for some spots. I heard we were going to be tagged. He goes, I don't do spots. And I said, no, but these are some good spots. He goes, I don't do spots. And he, like, what do you mean you don't say a word? And he didn't before his match. Nothing. Yeah. And then when that bell rings, man, he just takes off and he creates out in the ring. And he's one of those guys that brings the best out of you. And
no, because you're fighting for your life.
You're fighting for your life. Not everybody prospers. You know, right. You sink or swim.
Last question. We're going into WrestleMania this Sunday. What are you looking for out of this event?
Oh, man. I just look for the exciting thing for me is that everybody out there enters with the same goal. If they're not out there to steal the show, they're in the wrong line of business, you know. And I look like there's 4 or 5 matches that can do it. You know, you got the people that are supposed to do it. You know, you got Undertaker and Shane. They're supposed to steal the show. You got Triple H and Roman. They're supposed to steal the show. But then you get the women. 3 women. Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, you know. Miss Charlotte, 100,000 fans. Like, I like to think 10 years from now, we'll look back on this as one of the most important days in the history of our business, the day that women's wrestling, like, just arrived completely and finally. And you got maniacs like Kevin Owens out there who don't know... and a guy like who hasn't had a chance at a Mania, like Zack Ryder. You put those guys in that match, and there's no telling what could happen. It's just it's a wonderful event. Everybody's focused on trying to have the best match they possibly can. You want that Mania that you're involved in to be spoken of in like the reverent tones of like a WrestleMania 3 or WrestleMania 12, the one you and Brett were involved in, WrestleMania 17. So the guys are going out there, they want their Mania 32 to be up there in that type of league.
About 30 seconds left. Did you ever think back in the day from WrestleMania 1 that it would progress and become at the epic magnitude that it is now?
No, it's crazy that people from around the world give me if you're from a different country, give me a hell yeah. Yeah.
Y'all ain't all from a different country. That's bullshit. All right, maybe you are, but it was some good stuff. But I would have never imagined way back in the day when he started this damn thing, because he went out on a limb, he put his balls on the line, and it paid off. And again, they're counting me down. It's 15 seconds, 14, 13. We're at WrestleMania 32.
Let me finish with a Mr. McMahon for you. WrestleMania, bigger, better, better.
Hey, I'm Stone Cold Steve Austin. This is Mick F. Foley. We're here on the Stone Cold Podcast. We're here live in Dallas, Texas.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
The 2020 presidential campaign in the United States was a pretty wild spectacle to watch, no matter what your political perspective may be. But there was one particular bit of rhetoric that jumped out at me. It was a criticism of Donald Trump leveled by Bernie Sanders that made use of a well-known historical tidbit. Here's what Sanders had to say.
Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Trump golfs.
Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Trump golfs. The senator was riffing on one of the best-known stories from the history of ancient Rome. That is, that during a great fire that consumed the Roman capital in the year 64 AD, the self-absorbed Emperor Nero not only did nothing to help, but laughed and played the fiddle while his city burned. It's the kind of story that many people know, even if they know absolutely nothing else about Roman history. For a whole lot of people, the history of Rome is basically just Julius Caesar, beware the Ides of March, and Nero fiddled as Rome burned. So, in a way, it's not surprising that this story has proved so enduring. It's just too perfectly symbolic. If you need a historical example of the ruling elite being hopelessly and heartlessly out of touch, I mean, this is it. Nothing quite says, I could care less, like playing a jaunty little tune on the fiddle. But we really should ask, is any of this true? Did the Emperor of Rome really sit back and put on an impromptu hoedown as his city crumbled beneath his feet? Well, here's the thing. If he did, there was no way he played the fiddle. In 64 AD, the violin hadn't even been invented yet. The instrument as we know it today wouldn't come into being for another 1,400 years at least. To give you some historical context, Nero playing the fiddle is basically the same as Charlemagne shredding the electric guitar. In 64 AD, the violin was an impossibly futuristic instrument. But we do know that Nero was an amateur musician and was particularly fond of an instrument known as the lyre, which was a small Greek harp. He was known to put on long recitals for his advisors where attendance was mandatory. So the original story was that Nero actually played the lyre and sang as the Great Fire ravaged Rome. But there's good reason to doubt that story too. The most trustworthy Roman sources inform us that the Emperor Nero wasn't even in Rome when the Great Fire broke out. In fact, we're told that the emperor rushed back to the city as soon as he was informed so he could personally oversee the relief effort. So, Nero didn't fiddle as Rome burned, and he didn't play the lyre. He didn't sing. He didn't sit back all smug and laugh as his people suffered. He learned about the fire through messengers and did his best to respond. Now, that doesn't mean that Nero was somehow a good emperor or even a good guy. In fact, he was probably one of the worst. But the fiddle, well, that just wasn't a thing. Nero fiddling as Rome burned is a perfect example of what I call a historical myth, a little legend that got wrapped up in the transmission of our history and often gets repeated as a historical fact. My name's Sebastian Major, and on the podcast Our Fake History, we explore these historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story that it simply must be told. The podcast is one part storytelling and one part historical detective work. I do my best to bring these weird stories from our past to life, while also asking probing questions about whether or not we should believe them, and how these misunderstandings took root in the first place. On Our Fake History, the goal is to celebrate everything that's weird and wonderful about the past, while also thinking critically and trying to grab on to the slippery concept known as the truth. If Our Fake History sounds like it's for you, then subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.